welcome to the Dr. Pete Goldman Show. I'm super psyched to have my buddy Cesar Gracie here today. And welcome, Cesar.
Welcome, Dr. Pete. How you doing?
Doing good, buddy. So you're a very well-known guy, but I'd like to cover maybe some aspects of your history that people will find interesting, which maybe haven't been too much explored before. So anyway, we'll have a good time. So first of all, were you born in Brazil or the U.S.?
I was born in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. Particular barrio was called Copacabana in Rio de Janeiro.
You were there from birth until how old?
The first time I left, I think I was like seven or eight, right around there.
Did you obviously your first language was Portuguese? Obviously, did you
Yes.
speak English when you were 7?
I actually went to a school. It was called an American school. So I was learning English at a very early age in Brazil.
Did your mom have an inkling that you guys would move to the U.S. and she did it for that reason, or she just thought it was just good in general?
It was just good. I mean, English is an international language, especially back then, pre-internet and everything like that. It just for commerce and stuff, it was a good idea to learn English.
When you were hanging out with your other 7-year-old friends or 6-year-old friends or cousins, did they speak English, or you were pretty unique that you spoke it?
Well, my English wasn't very good when I was out there, to be honest with you. I was fluent, obviously, in Portuguese, but I knew some words and everything, but I wasn't fluent in English at the time.
When you speak Portuguese now to like your cousins who really spent, let's say, more time in Brazil, is your Portuguese up to that level because it was your first language, or is it you're a little below that?
Well, sometimes, I speak with an accent, actually, but the good thing in Brazil, that's very common because Brazil is a big country and there's a lot of different accents. Oops, sorry about that. And, but yeah, I even, it's kind of funny because I even forgot some words for a while and everything and kind of had to relearn the certain words because when I came to the US, my mother actually didn't want me speaking Portuguese because she was so adamant about me learning English extremely well that it was like speak English, and I actually forgot stuff in Portuguese.
What precipitated the move? You might not know, you were 7 years old, but maybe she told you. Why did you guys move to the U.S. when you were 7?
She ended up marrying an American, and he lived out here, so she ended up moving out here to California.
So he raised you for a time, you would say, or not really?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I was a rambunctious child. kind of did my own thing for the most part, but yeah.
Okay. But you liked him at least a little. You did.
Yeah. It was all good.
Okay, that's cool. And that was in California?
Correct. Northern California.
Okay. Close to where you live now, or a different part?
Yeah, it's very close to where I live now.
Okay. So you grew up in the Bay Area, basically.
I did.
So here's an interesting point. So now you're 7, you can correct me on the ages, but you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Your mom is probably telling you that her dad, your grandfather, Carlos Gracie Sr., probably telling you about him.
Yeah.
But, you're 15, you're 16, there's not like jiu-jitsu around. I don't know if you did like karate or taekwondo or wrestling, but did you have a little part of you thinking like, man, I'd like to learn this thing that my family is teaching at that point, mostly, or maybe only in Brazil? Or did you think like, oh, that's super cool? I mean, every family has something that's super cool, but I'm not particularly interested in learning.
Well, pretty much. So in Brazil, I had done some jiu-jitsu, as a child. And I don't think moving here, I realized the significance really of the art, if you will, how big it was. So when I moved out here, I started doing karate, of all things. I think I must have been like 10 or 11, right? Like, right around there. I did some karate and everything like that. There was no jiu-jitsu here. Not that style of jiu-jitsu. It was more like Aikido if you're going to do that. But Jiu-jitsu in its form did not exist here.
I've seen some old pictures of like, let's say Carlos and his like kids, you know, and there's like, and probably nephews and nieces. Cause like me, it's like a class picture of like, I don't know, 17 people. And I remember even like Carlay is there, but Carlay looks like he's like 8 or something like that.
Right.
So, but I see girls and boys with gis.
Yeah.
I'm assuming your mom was in that picture.
She probably was.
Right. So your mom was also taught at some level jiu-jitsu.
100%. They all practice it.
So when you were like doing karate, did your mom sometimes say, "Hey, Cesar, listen, I'm really glad you're doing karate, but I'm gonna show you like a sotagari or something"? Like, did she kind of she interested?
Yeah,
in that?
no, she did. She showed me some self-defense stuff. We my mom was very close to Hollis Gracie,
Yeah,
who at the time was the champion, and also other people came and stayed with us a lot. One of them being Carlos Gracie Jr., who does the Worlds, and he owns all the Gracie Baja and everything. So I always had cousins coming to the United States that would stay a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it was, and it was like, "You're doing karate?" You know what I mean? Look at this. It was kind of funny. You know, they're trying to, what you're talking about, you know, like, "Hey, we do this," and so forth.
your mom has the same mom as Carlson or Carlinos or Carlay?
The same mom as Carlson.
Got it. Okay, so your mom is a full sister with Carlson and Hobson.
Correct.
That's her like full. Okay, got it.
Right.
Okay, got it. Did you have a lot of exposure to your uncle Carlson along the way?
Not so much, you know, Carlson. Um, he was his story is pretty amazing, you know, and he had branched off. He was under, you know, even though he's Carlos's kid, he was with Anu for a while and so forth. He kind of he branched off, if you will, and did his own thing. At the time, the family was very unipolar, or just kind of like, okay, we're doing this, you were doing this, you know. The leader of the family was Carlos for forever, and he kind of said what was going to happen, what kind of food he did, everything. As he got older, he got really older, and Edu kind of took over, if you will, you know. And Edu, there was a little bit of a schism back then, and Carlos didn't want to do things necessarily the way Edu was doing it. He wanted to teach his guys different. He was going in a different direction, if you will. And so he went off and did his thing. And so Carlson, I don't remember him ever visiting even out here, for example. He really got into his academy. I mean, he was a full-fledged guy at his academy and his people. He believed in what he was doing. And he was one of those guys. He just kind of stayed there with his guys and built his vision, if you will.
You may not know the answer to this, or maybe you do, but or maybe your mom told you. I don't know, because you were pretty young. But when Carlos Sr. got older but was still around, and Elio kind of took over, but you mentioned that there was a couple, whatever they were, directions or philosophies or things or events or whatever that Elio was doing, and Carlos wasn't like thrilled with, and then whatever happened. Do you know the themes of some things Elio was doing that Carlos didn't love, some things he was changing? Do you know what they were, or you just knew that they existed?
It's just, you know, Edu had his way. I think everybody, you get jujitsu and you add to jujitsu, and Edu had added and put, you know, how do I describe this? Carlos did something so amazing. He was very beloved, Carlos Sr. And Edu, you know, he just wanted to do things his way. And it just kind of, you know, he had his sons. He was adamant that one of his sons was going to be the family champion, the whole thing. And I mean, the guy, he contributed a lot to jiu-jitsu, but he was a very hard taskmaster, if you will. And I think Carlson, he just wasn't with that program. He was all into he was the family champion at the time. You know, Enyo had gotten older, had lost to a guy named Santana, Valdemar Santana, who was a student for a long time, very strong, tough guy. But Enyo's age just couldn't keep up. And then Carlos comes in at 18 and beats the guy, and suddenly is the family champion. And I wasn't there, so I can't really say exactly what happened.
Okay.
I've heard some things, but I don't know. And then Carlson just wanted to teach his guys the way he wanted to teach his guys, and he built his legacy, and he created probably what I think to this day was the greatest guys that one guy has ever prepared. That's who Carlson was. So Carlson to me was he was a role model to me, even though I never trained under him. I was never part of his group in Brazil. I barely know those guys, but he was a role model to me, what he did, how he molded what he did on his own. But he wanted to do things on his own. He did.
Okay. Let me ask you, it's funny because I was going to ask you a question later, but actually in light of what you said, I'm going to ask you now, and then we'll kind of get back to, your evolution and your biography. But one thing, I'm going to give you a big compliment as I ask you the question, I'm going to give you a very sincere compliment. If you think about a kid, let's say, I'm just making this up, some kid and he has like 4 brothers. So he kind of, maybe he's the third oldest, let's just say. He wants to kind of like distinguish himself because there's 3 other brothers. So he wants to kind of distinguish himself. Or maybe someone like yourself is from a huge family where most of the people in the family are doing the same thing. I mean, some people probably don't care about distinguishing themselves, but some people do. And there's a lot of competition to distinguish oneself in a family like that of fighters and trainers, etc. But if you think about the great, the ability to produce great fighters, gi, no gi, MMA. I mean, you're like in the top 3 ever because there's like the Carlson team, there's your team. I don't know what other team, but there's probably a couple other Gracie teams that had a lot of spectacular success. But you're obviously in the top 3 with the Diaz brothers and Jake Shields and Melendez and Terrell, etc. So I mean, you actually, in the midst of like 300 other Gracies, created a team that was like better than everyone else's, or like maybe I don't know about Carlson or whatever, because of course he had Sperry and Bustamante and all that stuff. And, Brazilian top team and whatever that became. Well, first of all, you must be pretty psyched about that. I mean, you must be pretty proud of that, I'm assuming, yeah?
Yeah, it's kind of, you start to reflect on that later. When you're in it, you're just doing it. You're just like, you have to have a passion for whatever you do. You have to love what you do. You have to love the people that you're training to their successes are my successes and their failures, my failure, that type of a thing. But yeah, maybe when I'm in a wheelchair,
hopefully never be in a wheelchair. Hopefully you'll be walking around at 95.
I'll have to help you not be in that wheelchair. But yeah, I'm happy that I was able to be a positive influence, not on just the famous people, but the people no one's ever heard of. When people call me to this day and they said, "Larry, you changed my life." I was bullied. I was suicidal. I didn't have anything. I didn't have anyone you get these kids that don't have, role models. Their dad's a drunk or a drug user, mom, whatever their situation is at home. And we gave them a positive influence in our academy. I mean, that's probably more important to me than anything else.
So first of all, that's fantastic. And I think a lot of martial arts school owners who do things properly share that amazing feeling when people tell them the kind of things. So I'm not discounting that at all. Like you said, it's probably more important. But with that said, I'm just a little curious about the success of the team for a moment. Look at a guy like Hollish, who you mentioned, Hickson, etc. I mean, you know, the Machado brothers, like there's a lot of competition, so to speak, to create spectacular teams and fighters. And outside of Carlson, what do you think it was about you or your academy that that was able to produce what was produced?
I think I had a vision, and I had willing participants that wanted to get to that level, or guys that wanted to be superstar fighters and the best, and they believed in getting there. They had like a brotherhood at my school. They became like really good friends. To this day, they're very good friends. And they went through, and I put them through like a very rigid training, hard
When you
training.
saw when you saw a guy like, I'll just take Nick for example. When you have a guy like Nick Diaz come in and he's a white belt, doing his best, probably has a good attitude, training a lot. Did you think to yourself, man, this guy's going to be XYZ if he sticks with this, or it didn't occur to you? You said, no, I'm going to do my best to train him. I don't know what's going to happen. Because like Customato, when Mike Tyson was like 15, or he's like, this guy's going to be world champ if he does what I say. Did you look at a guy like Nick Diaz and say, this guy is going to do XYZ, or you just thought, no, he's coming. I'm going to do my best to teach him. Whatever happens, happens.
So there's other guys that have said they don't believe in talent. I don't believe in talent. I believe in hard work. Nick had talent for sure. But when you have talent and you have hard work, that's the winning combination right there. And there's other guys, that are most talented people that I've met don't go anywhere, to be honest with you. I'd rather have a hard worker than a talented guy. But Nick was one of those odd combinations where he was talented and a hard worker. So
makes sense. How did you, I don't know any other term to say besides catch up, but I'll tell you what I mean. How did you catch up? Like, for example, you take a guy like Half, who's probably been training like 2 hours a day, 7 days a week since he's 6 years old. And then you, who kind of like learned just geographically based on where you were, you learned it later. How did you kind of catch up? Not that it was a competition with anyone in particular, but how did you catch up? How did you catch up with the rest of your family members getting so good at jiu-jitsu, and then getting so good you could already, like we already discussed, teach it at such a high level?
Well, obviously, number one, you have to have good people around you, and Half was probably my main training partner. And I ended up bringing him to the U.S. You mentioned the Machados. I brought them to the U.S. So I trained with the Machados for a long time, and Half was my primary training partner, especially up here in Northern California. A lot in Brazil.
Just pause there for a second. When Half was like a black, I don't know exactly how it worked out, but you can correct me on the details. But when Half was like a black belt and you were like a blue belt, I don't know if it was like that. But how were you able to train with him since he had so many more years on the mats?
Well, Half actually didn't have that many more years on the mat. I'm older than Half, so we were actually blue belts together.
Okay,
so one guy. Let's see. When I started, when I restarted jiu-jitsu, Half, I think he'd just gotten his blue belt, and then I got a blue belt pretty quick because I trained all day. I'd wake up in the morning, go train, then go eat, go train.
Where was this? When you were training all day, geographically, what academy was that? Where were you?
My two primary academies that I trained with were Gracie Baja, and there was Helion Gracie, which was in Leblon, I think at the time, which is all barrios in Rio de Janeiro.
So how old are you then when you're training with Helion and Gracie?
When I'm training with Helion, I want to say I'm like 18 years old or so.
Okay. So you graduated high school in the U.S. You moved to Brazil after that.
I go to Brazil. The first time. I think I was 18 or maybe 17. I don't know, something like that. But I went to Brazil and lived there. I was training with Helion, and he was kind of a part of Carlos Jr. and Helion are brothers. So one ran the Gracie Baja, and one ran, Helion ran his own club over there in God, I think it was Leblon. I'm pretty sure it was. So I would kind of go back and forth, but I was primarily in Leblon. I really took the Helion, and he was the guy you're talking about, where he's the black belt and I'm the blue belt.
Got it. Okay.
You know, it'd be him. So yeah. So, you know, back then, and just, it was, the days consisted of just training, and I kept an open mind. You know, when I came to the US, I continued my studies and I trained a lot. I trained with the Machados a lot. And then I went on to go with Hickson.
Speaking of Machados, let me ask you just a side question. I wouldn't really call it, I wouldn't really call it a tangent, but I guess it is a little bit. So and I'm good friends with Higgin, and also I'm good friends with John Machado, the youngest brother. I know the other three brothers not well, but I'm good friends with John and I'm good friends with Higgin. So I heard, not from them, by the way, not from the Machados, but I heard like in the Horian garage days when Hickson was just beating everyone up because he was kind of in his prime or something like that. I heard the only person that was kind of on his level was Higgin, and it was kind of like Hickson and Higgin, and they were like almost like, you know, one day, you know, he would tap him, he would tap him. So if Higgin was so spectacular, which he was apparently, I mean, he's big, of course, but he was much thinner then. Why? I mean, and you were around him. Why was Higgin so good? Like, why was Higgin the one guy who could keep up with Hickson? What was so exceptional about Higgins' jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, number one though, Higgin never tapped Hickson that I saw in my life.
Yeah, no, just to be clear.
If he did and I wasn't, that's fine. But every time I saw them train, they were the only ones who didn't. I mean, just to be clear, Higgin never told me that. I heard that from other people. So yeah, Higgin never said it. Right on. And who taps who, you know, it's whatever. But Hickson was the family champion. Higgin was a phenomenal grappler because he got, and again, I was Higgins' best friend for a very long time. Me and Higgin I brought him he'd never been on a plane before. And I flew with him the first flight he ever took to my house in Northern California. And then I drove him down to Southern California, and he lived with me. I paid the rent at the house, and he ended up moving in with me. So, and I trained a lot with Higgin. He was, number one, an incredible instructor. If his talent for creating teams and competitors was amazing. I mean, not fighters. I'm talking about straight up jiu-jitsu to tournaments and whatever. There was no comparison. I mean, this is my opinion only, and I trained with both, and I'm saying that Higgin was the better instructor, if you asked me, my opinion. You know what I mean? And he just got it. You know, Higgins not how do I put this delicately? He's not like going to be in some Mensa thing or something, but when you're talking jiu-jitsu, the guy gets it. The guy gets it.
Higgin, just to agree with you, I trained at John Machado's academy for a few years, which was great. I love training at John Machado's academy, and I love John also. But I'll say I probably, just because I was friends with Higgin, I've probably taken 15 classes at his academy. The thing that I always marveled about was like Higgin would show something. Just you could be shown something at any academy, and then I'm like tapping everyone with it. Like the next day, like he shows incredibly practical stuff that really works quickly. Exactly.
Yeah, he could just make the guys. I mean, because he had an understanding, almost like and again, I'm not saying this in a disrespectful way, but you've seen them like a Rain Man thing. It was like he sees the puzzle and he puts it together, you know. And so as far as like that, I mean, he was just an awesome instructor, and still is, I'm sure. And himself as a grappler was, I mean, it was like just heavy water flowing. You've rolled with him. So out of the Machados, he was the best. You know, he was like,
and also his. Not that I'm an expert on the history of sport jiu-jitsu. I'm sure I know just a fraction of what you know, but I think I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Kaiki. Am I saying his name right? Kaiki.
Yeah.
Kaiki, I know that Elio Gracie said. I mean, he might have just been saying this to hype it up, but Elio Gracie is quoted as saying, "Besides my sons, Kaiki's the best." And Higgin, I don't know if it's true or not, but he said that. But Higgin competed against Keiki 3 times and beat him all 3 times. Pretty good. And also, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. Jemalau, is it Jemalau? Saying his right now.
Jamilau, yeah.
He beat like everybody, and then Higgin beat him, and then Higgin beat Holet. I mean, Higgin beat a lot of really good guys.
Yeah, Higgin was a phenomenal grappler. Yeah, we'd have to see how we do with these other guys that are big too. I don't know. Everybody tries to. How would Boucher have? I mean, it's a different era. You can't. I have no idea. But outside, I can tell you that in my day, outside of Hickson and those guys, and like he said, Edu's kids, whatever, Hollis was under Carlos. Okay, he was the family champ, and when he passed away, Hickson became the family champ. But Higgin in Brazil was, an extremely talented guy, and pretty much was the guy.
When you were training at Horian's garage for a while, you were training there, correct? Yeah. Did you? I mean, obviously, I think Hickson and Higgin were both there, and whoever else, Hoyce, I guess, was there. Did you find that a very productive era in your jiu-jitsu, or just was a little part of it that whatever?
The weird thing is this: growing up, when I went and trained with these guys would have private classes, they'd have group classes. So I never had a private class, for me. Like I just kind of had to learn. I would be the uki, if you would, like, hey, Cesar, can you help me? I'm going to teach this guy a private. Can I, and he's going to do the moves on you. So I would do that all the time. But I kind of learned that way, if you will.
Yeah.
And I got to a certain level with those guys, and and with Hickson, I saw a different side of jiu-jitsu, because Hickson's style was 100% different than the Machado style. I guess everybody has their style. And then really when I moved up to Northern California is when I kind of started getting really my own style, if you will.
Well, this is an interesting part, because I wanted to ask you this. So if Hickson has a certain style, the Machados have a certain style, you're taught by both, and of course, then you develop your own style. Would you say, just in a couple sentences, what was some characteristics of the Machado style? What were some characteristics of Hickson's style? And what were some characteristics of the style that you eventually kind of created for yourself?
Higgin was sport jiu-jitsu. Obviously, I'm sure he could fight, because, he did a little bit of whatever, but it was a very sport type of jiu-jitsu. And Hickson was all about fighting. Everything was about fighting, like self-defense, like you get mount and you want mount because of this reason. It wasn't, oh, you got 4 points. It was like, I trained under Hickson for a couple of years, and it was more, the base was more important, like having base, not being swept. That base is just so important. And it was more, like I said, there was a lot of self-defense and so forth. With the Machado style was more of a, let's grapple, I'm going to try to tap you out, and so forth. And they both have their merits. They were both great. John Jack Machado was, his speed was what was, oddly enough, you mentioned Hickson. If anything, John Jack would be the one that was more dangerous to Hickson than Higgin even. And because they would, if you mess up something on John Jack, he's going to get you. His speed,
And how about your style? You were gonna get to your
character. Yeah, I'll get to me. Me, what I think influenced me a lot, and my primary influences were obviously my instructor Hideo, and all those years training with the Machados, with Hickson. It was a very eclectic style. And then Half came over. I brought Half out. And then I really opened it up to Sambo and to wrestling. The Brazilian style at the time was a judo-based style. Jiu-jitsu and judo. That's what the two things were together. Now when you get into America, I think probably two of the predominant styles now is jiu-jitsu and wrestling, because there's so many wrestlers in America. So I was open to all these people coming in, and I kind of like, all right, we're going to do footlocks. We do footlocks. You know what I mean? And I got good at that. I got great at attacking legs and defending my legs and everything. And I would learn from Sambo people, and I think the wrestling helped me out tremendously with my style, with my base. That's when I made the transition to more of a top attack game than bottom, because I used to love guard, and I still do, but I was weak on top. I felt my base was lacking, and I think the wrestling and so forth kind of helped me with that.
Who taught you to wrestle?
A lot of people taught me. My main people, Casey Strand, who's he was the head, kind of the wrestling coach for my team. There were some other guys. I mean, we had so many high-level D1 wrestlers at the time, like even like Dave Terrell, and he wasn't D1 because he didn't go to college, but high school champ, regional. A bunch of other guys you don't know, but they were like very high-level D1 wrestlers. And I used to just go to wrestling practice with them. They would wrestle, we'd just do takedowns, and I would just like pick it up. And I did gilas, and I was an open like to Sambo guys. You know, they would go into a jiu-jitsu class anywhere, and they were told they couldn't train there because that's all illegal. You got heel hooks, you know, whatever footlock or knee bar they're doing was illegal. Well, at my academy, it was all legal. I said, I don't care what you're going to tap me with, you know, because that, you know, on the street, who cares? So I allowed everything. And
when the Sambo guys came,
mm-hmm.
I'm sure, you know, even with a good attitude, but let's say they were tapping you or some of your best guys, were you just like, okay, that's cool. Can you back up? Can you back up 3 steps and show me how to do that? Were you just like learning on the spot?
I never got tapped out by a Sambo guy, just to make that first.
Okay.
Because I was really smart. I would control their sleeves.
Got it.
And I just wouldn't let them, like, I would do a different type of game. I would do a game that was very cautious. I knew if the guy put me in the move, he'd tap me out. So, and I trained with some pretty good Sambo people, some world-class Sambo guys, but I've never been tapped out by it, you know.
When you got your black belt from, I guess, your Uncle Hobson, if I'm correct,
mm-hmm.
Now, you weren't really training with him. Was it a matter of your other relatives saying, hey, Uncle Hobson, like Cesar's obviously a black belt. We just want you to ceremonially give it to him.
Correct.
Or did you train under Hobson a bit? And then
I never trained under Hobson. What happened was Henzo petitioned it for me. He used to want it. And he said, look, we're going to promote you to black belt. And, you know, I wanted Hobson at the time was head of the biggest federation. It was the Rio de Janeiro Jiu-Jitsu Federation of Brazil. You know, it was just the first federation that ever existed. So lineage wise, it was the correct way to do it. So it predated the IBJJF, for example. So, and then Hobson, you know, promoted me that way.
Okay. Kind of backing up a little bit, but we didn't really get to cover it. When you were at the kind of Gracie garage, did you learn from Horian? Like, I mean, even if, you know, did he show you a couple of things? Like, oh, that's pretty cool. I mean, I didn't know that.
No, Horian at the time wasn't teaching. Okay. So it was Hoist. Now, Horian only taught like movie stars and stuff. You know, he would teach like celebrity teaching. And it was primarily, Horian was a very good self-defense instructor. The guy has a knife, the guy does this, the guy does that. You grab them, you headlock, you know. He was doing self-defense. So when he was teaching, I really wasn't there. I was there when Hoist was teaching.
Got it. Okay. And then when you opened your academy, first of all, what was the year that you opened like your own academy? What year was that?
In let me think. God, it was, I don't know if it was 1990, 91.
Okay,
right around.
Perfect. So
in Northern California, you're talking about, because I opened the academy in Southern California before that.
Okay. Well, I'll say Northern California, like what ultimately became here. So it's 1991-ish.
92, maybe.
Okay, 92. So it's exactly 1 year before the UFC exists.
Right.
So let's say it's 1993 or 1994. And someone's a little skeptical, you're like, hey, you're skeptical, just watch this video. I mean, like, but you didn't have that luxury because there was no UFC yet. So I don't want to use I guess we'll use the term. So like, Did you get dojo stormed much where people were like, this is nonsense. I do
Yeah,
this and I'm coming to challenge you. Was that happening quite a bit?
I wouldn't say quite a bit. It happened a few times, like local tough guys and stuff. Um, and they needed to be, shown. It's like, and they just do it. You got it's like on the spot. You know what I mean? And you take care of your business, and that was it. And so I got pretty popular, in the area, known as like that's the place to go. If you will, those guys are real.
Got it. Now, another thing I want to ask you, I remember one time I saw Hickson speaking, and
Mhm.
Hickson's theme, well, more than one time, I'm taking actually a combination of a few times I saw Hickson say this. Hickson said, look, be an expert at jiu-jitsu, but be familiar with boxing and kickboxing. Be familiar with it so you
Mm,
can close the distance, clinch, takedown, whatever. Okay. Which is fine. That's his
yeah.
philosophy. Good. That's great. Um, Now, obviously, at some point, like you're teaching Nick, you're teaching
Mhm.
me, and then they're
Yeah.
just like, man, I really want to get into boxing. I want to get like really good at boxing and even kicking to a degree. I wouldn't say either of them are super into kicking, but they both know how to
Yeah.
kick. I think Nick had done some stuff,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
certainly boxing. Boxing became very important to them. Now,
Huge.
now, obviously, I mean, I can't say how Hickson would have reacted if they were in his academy. I don't know. Maybe Hickson would say,
Mhm.
"Good, be about it, do that." But my
Yeah.
question for you is, was your attitude like, "Well, you're getting very elite level grappling practice here, but good, do boxing too. You're going to be incredibly well rounded." Were you just all for it?
No, we had a professional boxing gym in my school. I had brought in this guy Carl Sharrock and some other guys. We had the talent in my academy was amazing. Andre Ward trained at my academy when he was 17 before the Olympics. This one guy, I'm trying to remember his name. He was the first WBC champ from the Philippines, trained at my academy. We had an incredible boxing program, and that's what Nick walked into. I believed a lot in boxing because my grandfather Carlos was an amateur boxer, and he really enjoyed it, and he thought it was important. Also, you got to remember that fights back in the day were looked at differently. 30-minute fights, an hour fight. Well, in the UFC, you're talking 5-minute rounds and so forth, or 10-minute rounds or whatever before that,
Pride or
and
whatever.
you can't the style of jujitsu was created really for the smaller man to be able to win, to survive the onslaught and then eventually win. Well, that in fighting, in the sport of fighting, that doesn't work because you're always going to lose a decision. So you have to kind of take the fight to the person. Where jiu-jitsu had more of a somewhat, more of a self-defense, more, and kind of time is on your side, if you will. And in MMA, time is not on your side if you think that way. So you have to pressure, and you could get knocked out doing that pressure. It's not what kind of went against the philosophy of what jiu-jitsu was. But for these guys that want to test themselves in MMA, they had to change that up, and I understood that.
Okay. Um, what about as far as again, just a slightly different subject, just looking at the current landscape of sport jiu-jitsu, and obviously
Mhm.
Gordon Ryan is really good at no gi,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you've watched him compete at least a few times.
Yeah.
And you have obviously a very good eye for fighters and fighting and gi
Mhm.
and no gi and MMA. Just in a simple sentence, what makes Gordon Ryan so good?
Gordon, number one, he's not a little person. So um, he's very technical. He can impose his will, very strong. And he's technical and he's strong. So he's got a great leg lock game, and there's a lot of people that haven't caught up to that yet. And he'll put you in that world of his, and he'll get the foot lock. People don't really know how to deal with that. So he's an amazing grappler.
By the way, we would only be hypothesizing, but we're
Hmm.
allowed to hypothesize. And
Right.
I have no idea if he has any interest in doing MMA ever. In fact, I suspect he doesn't have an interest in MMA. Of course, I have no clue. But
Right.
if he did MMA, how do you think he'd do?
I think he'd do good. do. Because if he takes that same passion that he does in the grappling, there's a lot of adjustments, though, is the thing. Is he going to be at the same level of success? If you look at where he's at now and everything, I mean, he's the best guy, the grappler right now, Gilas. But that doesn't mean he's going to be like, if you put a gi on Gordon Ryan, he's not going to do very well. And he said that himself, you know. I think it was Cornelius. Keenan Cornelius went over there, threw a gi on him and was tapping him out, you know. So he's good at what he does. But now he's got to learn something completely different. Now you can't put your hands down here to, you know, because you're getting punched in your face. So the dynamics change. And I think he'd be successful, though. I don't think he'd be a champ, though, like a UFC champ. I don't think so.
I would agree with that. By the way, when he said that when he put the gi on and Keenan Cornelius was tapping him or whatever, is that, I mean, is that because of the friction in general, or is that because his neck becomes a bigger issue from the collar and being choked?
Well, it's kind of like what I said about the Sambo guys training with me. Probably if we were gi-less, I would have been getting tapped out back in the day, but I knew to control their sleeves so they could never touch my feet. And I would do like a spider guard. I'd put my feet on their, you know, their elbows, or I would do stuff like that and completely keep my legs out of the way, completely. So there was not, and then I'd shoot in a triangle or something like that. And their rule set, if you lift a guy, if you're in a triangle, to get out of a triangle, all you got to do is lift the guy a little bit off the ground. And the referee calls it immediately. Well, in jiu-jitsu, you can lift them up, but that doesn't, it's like whatever, you know. So it's whatever rule set you're going to be a slave to that rule set in a sense until you learn how to, you know, modify things. But yeah, so he would have to, Gordon Ryan would have to change some things up. And yeah.
Okay. What about the Gracie diet? You mentioned right at the beginning of our talk today about your grandfather creating the Gracie diet. I'm slightly familiar with it, and obviously I understand about health, so I understand it from a certain level.
Right.
I guess the main question is, do you do it?
I don't do it actually like I should. If I did, I'd probably be in a lot better shape right now, to be honest with you. I did it religiously in Brazil, and I was pretty good shape and living, I guess, the American lifestyle where, hey, you got to be here now. You got to, you know, we don't have people preparing. I don't have people preparing my meals at home and doing this and that. There's a lot of fundamentals of it that I do. You know, and I was able to influence a lot of people, like, you know, you mentioned like Nick and those guys, where they had a great diet at that point and everything. But the Gracie diet, there's a lot of food mixing, which people at the time didn't understand, because we're talking the 1950s and stuff. I mean, people just, they made fun of us. They're like, what are you talking about food mixing and not eating this food with this type of food? And what do you mean you can't go eat this McDonald's or whatever, you know? So my grandfather was, you know, there's a picture of him, like, okay, just to give you an example, I show up at his place, at his house in the 1980s. I want to say it was 85, 86. And I walk in and he's walking up the stairs, and the man's in his 80s, but he's walking up the stairs on a handstand. He's walking with his hands up the stairs, up a flight of stairs, walking on his hands. And it was just like, what? This is crazy. The guy was the guy was amazing. You know, he would do stuff that was like in his 80s, stuff I quit doing, you know, 20 years ago or something. And it was like pretty impressive, but his diet was really good.
Speaking of your grandfather, since he had 21 kids, which your mom was one of the 21, was it hard for her to get attention? Not hard for her to get attention. I'm sure if she called him or she needed him, I'm sure he was there. But is it hard to be like, did she indicate to you it's hard to be one of 21?
No, I knew it was. As a matter of fact, she was somewhat raised by Edu. because he had so many kids, and Edu didn't have he didn't have kids. You know, he had some issue with not being able to have kids with one of his wives,
That
and
was
later
his first wife. Yeah.
yeah, right. So later he started having kids, but in the beginning it was like Carlos. Um, it was a weird situation. I can't explain.
I forgot. I knew that, but I forgot about that first
Yeah.
batch, which was like, because I didn't realize your mom. I didn't know who your mom was full brother and sister was, but I know like Hobson, Carl. They were kind of given to Elio.
Yeah.
That first batch. Yeah.
Correct. They're like, here, raise these kids, help me, because I've got so many. It was a different time. It was a different world, you know.
Yeah. Sorry. Good.
And my mother's mother passed away like right after her birth.
She had like TB or something, right?
She had tuberculosis, and she died. My mother has never seen her mother. She wouldn't know what she looked like in a picture. So it was a different time, and Edu kind of raised her and her sister and a brother and so forth, Hollis and that whole thing. So yeah, he was a do this, you know, type of a thing. So yeah.
What about on mindset? Like, for example, let's say I'm just taking a random fight, but you can talk about whatever you want, of course. But let's say like Nick is about to fight like Gomi, let's just say. So you're in the locker room with Nick before Gomi. And Nick knows this guy punches very hard. He's not really a kicker. He's not great at submissions, but he's a good wrestler. So he's a good wrestler and he punches really hard.
Yeah.
And you're in the locker room with Nick and he's putting his gloves on, he's stretching, he's getting warm, he's hitting the mitts, whatever. And then you're going to say a few words to Nick, I'm not saying to psych him up, but, just to have a good mindset. What kind of things are you telling Nick before a fight like that?
There's a couple of different philosophies, number one, in a fight. Okay. One is thinking you're going to psych somebody up. And that might happen, oh, you've trained harder, and you can say all the stuff that you want to say, and it becomes a little flat though, for some reason. It has to be more of like, he knows he's fighting for our academy. He knows he's fighting against the world almost. And you also kind of make it like, it's just time to take care of business, man. All the psyching and everything, I don't know. It's, some people that kind of works and some people that doesn't. With Nick, we wouldn't really psych him up though. He knows what's coming, and he knows it's like, hey, let's just get it done. Let's do this.
Okay. Are there any fights that's a great fight. Just for so many obvious reasons. What a great fight. What a great finish. Tough opponent. Like, what a great fight. Were there any other fights that you cornered your students on that you were just particularly like, I don't want to say amazed, but you were like, wow, that was incredible. What a great win. And where you were in the corner of one of your students and just with a spectacular result, any that stick out to you? That's one of them.
That is certainly one of them. The funny thing is like when you talk about Nick, there's so many of those.
Yeah, you got a good
the Robbie Lawler fight. Think about the first fight with Robbie Lawler, where Robbie was slated to be the next champ, and the Gomi fight, and there's so many fights with Nick that it was just like, what? He was amazing. He amazed me. Like, dude, because he could get it done standing with the boxing. He could do it with the jiu-jitsu, and it was, and the other one was fight Cyborg, I think, was a great
one. Cyborg was a great, what a great moment of a great fight was?
Paul Daly.
Yeah, I was about to bring up all of that. What a great moment of the Paul Daly fight for me, watching it. There was a point that must have been in the first 2 minutes where Daly kind of clipped him and Nick just kind of went down the floor, and he was kind of almost like crawling towards his legs to kind of grab on his thing. And what I really thought was great about that moment was he was obviously hurt a little at least, but he was kind of, even in this very awkward position, like fairly calm. He was like kind of calmly just working his way back up. And that was a great moment.
Did you ever see recently the guy that climbed El Capitan?
I don't think so.
He climbed it. They had a documentary, so I want you to look it up. He went and without a rope, he climbed El Capitan, whatever, and what is that, Yosemite or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, no one's ever done that in the history. And the guy, and his heartbeat, he just looked at it analytically and thought, I might die, I might this, I might that. And that's kind of like how Nick was. You know, it was just like he just kind of like studied the things, and yeah, that might happen. Oh, that might happen. But because he could control his emotions like that and everything, he didn't panic ever. He never panicked, you know. So he's had so many moments. It's amazing, you know.
Great. All right. Well, Cesar, that was a super. Well, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. That was a great interview. I appreciate you coming on. I hope you had a good time too.
Yeah.
And we will see each other soon.
All right. Great talking to you. Thank you so much. Take care.